So I want to start with a couple of slides here, just this first one, because I think they bring us to the heart of this morning's reading from the Gospel of Mark. Right, again, this story that is both famously known and yet, I would say, profoundly misunderstood. This is a little quiz from the World Food Program, inviting us to reflect on what we associate, what we assume hunger is. The first question, I want to gauge you all. What do you know about hunger? What is the definition of hunger, aka food insecurity? The desire to have more food? When someone skips one meal a day? Any stomach pain from not eating? Or when someone doesn't get enough calories and nutrients? Any thoughts? The answer, next slide. The last one. It's not just being hungry, it's literally there's a calorie count, a basic calorie count that we need to sort of sustain us. A base level of about 12 to 1,500 calories. And if you don't get that each day, each of us, you probably mostly get a few thousand calories a day. You're food insecure. Some countries, like in Gaza, they will literally count the calories. They will divide all the food that's allowed in through these kinds of programs and divide that among the 2 million people that are in Gaza to come up with a base calorie count to make sure they're only letting in enough food that people can survive. Literally calculated out. What's the least that we need to give people to be alive? Next slide. A couple more questions, real quick. How many people in the world are facing this kind of extreme hunger right now? Almost 10 million? 50 million? 100 to 150 million? More than 300 million? Thoughts? More than 300 million people. Almost 350, go to the next slide. Almost 350 million people worldwide right now face extreme hunger. Next question. Is there enough food in the world to feed everyone? No. We only produce about 8%. Yes, there's more, but we throw much of it away. Or yes and no, it depends on the seasons and the weather. Or maybe, but there's no way to really know. Yeah, Thea, what do you think? Listen to Thea. Next slide. Yes, it turns out there is more than enough food. Even with the changing weather patterns, we just throw, what does it say? We throw about a fifth of all food produced each year, about 1 billion meals each day, gets thrown away. I start with these slides because they bring us to the heart of this morning's reading from the Gospel of Mark. Right? Again, famously known, profoundly misunderstood. We've been taught that the story is about Jesus creating food out of thin air, right? Defying the laws of nature. That's the miracle. And the act of faith on our part is simply to believe that. And if we pray hard enough, if we have enough faith, Jesus will defy the laws of nature for us. But I don't know if you heard this in the gospel reading this morning, but it doesn't actually focus on the mechanics of the food's multiplication at all. How it happens. It doesn't say that Jesus pulled the food out of a hat. Right? We've added that in. We've read that into the text. It's not there. But I think there is a miracle. It's just that it's something much more profound and difficult than this. But to hear that, it helps to know some context. This story takes place amongst villagers living along the Sea of Galilee. During Jesus' lifetime, these villages were undergoing dramatic changes as the ruler, a wannabe king named Herod Antipas, sought to commercialize the fishing industry, which comprised the majority of the local economy in one way or another. And so like subsistence farmers, these fishermen, they already struggled to catch enough just to pay the taxes that did exist and to consistently put food on the table. But once that industry was commercialized, there were so many new taxes and regulations introduced that it became nearly impossible to even afford to get started in the business. It's no wonder that 95% of these villagers are what we would call food insecure. They knew what it was to skip meals because they couldn't afford even the basics, to not get enough calories in a day. And so this morning's story also takes place. You have that, and then you also have this added detail that right after Jesus' disciples have come back from going out into these villages and bringing the good news to them, and apparently they were well received, but once they return, they also hear news of this wannabe king's reign of terror, that he has just had John the Baptizer executed for daring to speak out against him, criticize him. And so like the masses, they too are exhausted and overwhelmed by the forces of evil swirling around them. And so they turn to Jesus and they look to get on the boat and go away to a deserted place, a quiet place for some nice R&R. They need to regroup. But the people aren't ready to let them go. And so they run ahead of them. Literally, I don't know how, but they apparently knew where the disciples were going, a well-known deserted place, I guess. And so when the disciples and Jesus arrive, the crowds are already there gathering. Jesus, seeing that they are clearly hungry for both love and bread, for both justice and fish, is moved, has compassion for them. Not in pity, poor folks, but out of love. After spending the afternoon teaching and encouraging them, and the Gospels don't say this, but I'm sure there were little kids all gathered there on the hillside making lots of noises as well while Jesus was trying to preach. But after spending the afternoon teaching and encouraging them, the disciples, practical people that they are, they notice the sun is getting low and the people are getting hangry. They're hungry, they're starting to get agitated, and so understandably, quite reasonably, they advised Jesus to send the people out into the nearest villages to each buy something to eat for themselves before it's too late. I mean, and to be fair, what are the other options? Right? I don't know if you've noticed this before, but Jesus is not a particularly reasonable person. And so he turns to them and he simply says, "You, give them something to eat." We give them something to eat? You want the 12 of us to go and buy food for all of them? As they scan the hillside and see the thousands of people, they quickly venture, that's got to cost at least 8 months' worth of income. We've been following you. Where do you think we've got that kind of money? Right? You can hear the panic in their voices. Jesus' response, he effectively says, I didn't say buy, I said give. How much bread do you have? Take a look. They rummage around, reach into their bags. I don't know, amongst the 12 of them, they come back with more bad news. All we have is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. In other words, nothing. And this is where we, like the disciples, often get stuck. Right? Our imagination of what's possible is profoundly limited, especially when we're stressed and tired and hangry, right? We can all relate to that. But too often, what we call being realistic is really just the reduction of what's possible to what we've already known. It is possibility constrained by fear and anxiety. It's a lack of imagination and trust to move into the unknown. But precisely where the disciples in their anxiety see scarcity, Jesus sees abundance. And so he takes those meager offerings that they have. He gives thanks. He blesses it. And he begins passing it to the people. And to go back to where we began, what we witness is not a miracle of pulling food out of thin air. The gospel, again, isn't concerned with telling us precisely how this multiplication happened. What it wants us to trust, to notice, is simply that it did happen. That in the presence of Jesus and those who follow him, even amid seemingly scarce resources, even in the face of seemingly impossible circumstance, even when overwhelmed by their anxieties, people are fed, filled, and freed spiritually and physically. This is the good news. In a world that insists on scarcity, that this is the foundation of the world and insists that there's not enough resources, not enough food, not enough love, not enough grace, not enough safety. And therefore, we must be in competition for them all. We must put fences around us. We must lock some people away. Right? In a culture steeped in and fueled by anxiety that this scarcity produces in us, will we get some, or will we have to go without? In the midst of that, Jesus flips the script and says, no, scarcity is the myth. Abundance is the truth. I know it doesn't seem that way, and that abundance seems perhaps naive, and that the generosity that it calls us to sounds nice, but is, like Jesus' command to the disciples, you feed them, sounds absurd and very impractical. But what's really real, as the epistle of Ephesians insists in its prayer, is that the God who is at work within us is capable of abundantly, far, way, way more than we could ever ask or imagine. I love that even the grammar in the original Greek here is so over-the-top, superlative, repetitive as to be ridiculous. Like it's finding, how many ways can we find to say abundance, more, far beyond? Just puts them there in a row in order to make a point. Right? The multiplication of loaves and fish, however it happened, is not a one-time miracle to be believed in the past. It's a vision of abundance that we are called to trust and live by, to choose. A miracle that we are called to manifest. Greater things than I have done, Jesus tells his disciples and his followers toward the end of his life, will you do. You see, on that crowded hillside, Jesus organizes a community of collective care out of strangers who arrived looking to take care of themselves. Talk about a miracle. The good news is that God has given us through the earth and each other what we need. And trusting this truth empowers us to manifest miracles, to make the seemingly impossible possible through the power of generous community. The good news is that this crowd of strangers become neighbors by mobilizing into action, and despite not having a 5-year or 10-point plan, everyone is fed. Again, don't just take my word for it. Researchers, organizations like the World Food Program have made it clear. The issue is not that there's not enough food or resources. It's that we have failed in the courage and in the imagination and in the will to create the conditions to feed everyone, for everyone to have enough of what they need. What seems impossible is in fact possible. But for the miracle of everyone to have enough, for that to happen, the miracle of community, organizing, of strangers becoming neighbors who care for each other, that also has to happen. Right? This isn't about asking some rich billionaires or even just our government to save us while we remain unchanged. We too must become this change that we want to see in the world. We don't get to just tell others to do it. We too have to be on that journey. And I'll say, I'm incredibly proud of this congregation for the ways that we have done this over the last 6 years, including, as I've said before, but I want to keep saying it so that it becomes institutional memory, so that it becomes part of our story, how amidst a capital campaign to replace our aging roof that cost nearly $500,000, amidst the chaos of pandemic shutdowns and mass layoffs in 2020, 2021, we reached deep into our pockets and together raised $20,000, which through community partnerships, were able to significantly assist our most vulnerable and mostly undocumented neighbors amidst those mass layoffs. I received a call in the middle of all of this from someone who couldn't believe that we were asking people to do this. Why, they wanted to know, would we ask people to give away money for this when we already faced the monumental task of a $500,000 roof repair campaign? Like the anxious disciples, I understood the concern. It's a rational, understandable concern. But as a congregation, we dared to trust that somehow there would be enough. And by God, somehow there was. But we can't rest on the past, right? We are called to keep choosing this. And as the moderator team will be sharing in the coming weeks, there are going to be more opportunities to keep reaching into our pockets and grabbing that little bit of bread that we have and sharing it for the sake of this larger vision. Hi. To inspire us in that, I want to leave us with two brief, miraculous news stories of God's abundance. The first is from a coffee company that's ironically named Heretic Coffee Company in Portland, Oregon. I posted it up in the back there on our Good News station. Right, this past fall, when its owner realized that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, or sometimes called food stamps, that it was going to run out on November 1st due to the government shutdown, he, small business owner that he was, made the absurd decision to offer free breakfast to those now in need in Portland. There are other local businesses across the country that did something similar. Right? And as he was reflecting on this, he said it was a very simple thing. Our government is going to let people go hungry, and we're not okay with that. And we have food, and we can give away that food to people who are hungry. That's it. So as a business owner, of course, he was fully aware of the financial implications of offering free breakfast to an unspecified number of people at his coffee shop, right? He says, we had plenty of people tell us, you're going to be out of business in a week. You're going to be bankrupt. To which he responded, hey, if we literally have to shut our doors, if we go broke, making sure that children have food for breakfast, I'm really okay with that being the reason that we lose our business. From that conviction, that place, he made the choice, not knowing what would happen. But, and we oftentimes hear this to be the case when we actually step into that uncertainty, what he didn't anticipate was how his bold, courageous choice would result in an outpour of support from other small local businesses and individuals in the community, right? Once they heard that he was doing this, they too wanted to be a part of it to support his efforts. And so he set up a donation page to support the program, and within a few days, masses of people had donated over $180,000 for him to keep that program going as long as he needed. It's not to excuse the government, but it's to remind us that the seemingly impossible can be possible, far beyond what we think is possible. Last brief example. Recent studies, I want to get our imaginations going about what's possible. Recent studies show that there are over 2.5 million acres of underutilized land owned by religious communities across the U.S., often in high-need areas, and that if developed, they could support more than 800,000 new affordable home units. As an explicit counter to the not in my backyard movement to keep affordable housing out of our well-to-do neighborhoods, there's now a church movement looking to do just what the research is calling for, right? It's called Yes in God's Backyard. As one example, in 2021, Reverend Matt Connor of Newell Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is a church that worships about 50 people on a Sunday. It gathered its church leaders and it asked them to walk the grassy 4.5-acre field next to their church that they've long owned. And as you walk it, pray. Pay attention. Dream. What do you see? They initially came back with a few different answers, right? A soccer field, a farmer's market. But as they continued from that moment to continue discerning, those church elders coalesced around a dream of a housing community that would nurture families priced out by rising costs, just as the church had nurtured them 50 years before. Right? This wasn't a vision for getting butts in the pews. That's a vision driven by anxiety. Those who fill these future homes may or may not ever set foot in the church or know what it has done. But one thing is clear, that choosing to live from and toward the good news of God's abundance, it transforms those of us who choose it. That's good news, even as it transforms the spiritual and material realities of others. We are all changed when we trust in God's abundance. Again, the church can't solve the affordability crisis, but I wonder if we dared to reach into our pockets and offer what we have, to trust in that abundance, that there is enough, how we also could spark a movement of others saying, you know what, we could also do that, be part of that. And a seemingly overwhelming, impossible situation starts to become an extraordinarily possible one. And again, what other seemingly impossible circumstances marked by anxiety and scarcity in your lives, in our world, for this church, might God be waiting for us to miraculously come together and materialize? May it be so for our flourishing, for the flourishing of all the world.